I didn't hear my grandmother's voice until the day she destroyed my uncle's life. The strange part wasn't what she said. The strange part was that everyone in my family believed she couldn't speak at all. Not for years. They believed she couldn't hear either. So when my uncle stood in a courtroom weeks later, white as a sheet, staring at the 82-year-old woman he had abandoned like unwanted luggage, he looked as though he'd seen a ghost. But none of that would have happened if I hadn't come home that night and found her sitting outside my apartment, along with 2 old suitcases and a note that changed everything. I was exhausted when I got home. The kind of exhausted that settles into your bones and stays there. I had spent the previous 14 hours at Fort Carson dealing with personnel reviews, training schedules, and a last-minute readiness inspection that had somehow become my problem. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex in Colorado Springs, the sun had already disappeared behind the mountains. All I wanted was a hot shower and 6 hours of sleep before doing it all over again. Instead, I saw an elderly woman sitting outside my door. At first, I thought she was waiting for someone. Then I noticed the suitcases. 2 faded blue suitcases positioned neatly beside a folding chair. The woman sat perfectly still. Her hands rested in her lap. Her silver hair was pulled back into the same simple bun I'd seen my entire life. My heart stopped. "Grandma," the word escaped before I could think. She looked up. The porch light reflected in her pale eyes. For a second she seemed confused. Then recognition softened her face, and she smiled. I ran toward her. "Grandma Evelyn." I dropped my bag onto the concrete and crouched beside her. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched my cheek. That was when I saw the envelope resting on top of one of the suitcases. My name was written across the front. Sarah. Just Sarah. No explanation. No apology. No warning. A knot formed in my stomach. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 3 sentences. That's all. "She's your problem now. Don't contact us again. We're done." I read it twice. Then a 3rd time. The handwriting belonged to my Uncle Robert. I knew because I'd spent half my childhood receiving birthday cards from him before he stopped pretending to care. For several seconds I simply stared at the page. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I did. Perfectly. My uncle had abandoned his own mother, and he had left her at my door. I looked around the parking lot as though I might find cameras filming some cruel prank. Nothing. Just silence. My grandmother watched me carefully, almost nervously. I forced a smile. "It's okay." I wasn't sure whether she could hear me. The doctors had declared her almost completely deaf years ago. After a stroke, they said. Then another health problem affected her speech. Eventually, the family stopped speaking to her altogether. They spoke around her. About her. Never to her. I suddenly wondered if anyone had ever bothered trying. I pulled out my phone. Robert didn't answer. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I called my Aunt Linda. Blocked. I called my cousin Jason. Blocked. Every number. Blocked. My jaw tightened. Of course. They hadn't just abandoned her. They had planned it. I looked at my grandmother. She seemed smaller than I remembered. Frailer. Her coat was too thin for the evening temperature. There was a slight tremor in her hands. I felt something ugly rise inside my chest. Anger. Not loud anger. The dangerous kind. The quiet kind. The kind that settles in and waits. I stood up. "Come on, Grandma." I opened the apartment door. The place wasn't much. 1 bedroom. A tiny kitchen. A living room barely large enough for a sofa and television. I wasn't poor exactly. Army officers aren't starving. But I wasn't wealthy either. Most of my paycheck disappeared into student loans, military obligations, and helping younger soldiers when they got into trouble. Meanwhile, Robert lived in a 6-bedroom house outside Denver. Jason drove a new luxury SUV. They posted vacation photos from Hawaii and Florida every year. Yet somehow they couldn't find room for an 82-year-old woman. The thought made me sick. I carried the suitcases inside. My grandmother moved slowly behind me, looking around as if she didn't want to take up too much space. That hurt more than the note. Nobody should feel like a burden in their own family. I pointed toward the bedroom, then toward myself in the couch. She immediately shook her head. I smiled. No argument. I patted my chest, then pointed toward the couch. Military training helps when words fail. She stared at me for a moment. Then tears filled her eyes. She reached for my hand. I squeezed hers gently. That night I made soup. Nothing fancy. Just what I had. She ate quietly. I sat across from her and watched. There was something heartbreaking about how carefully she folded her napkin, how cautiously she moved, as though she expected someone to tell her she wasn't welcome. After dinner, I helped her settle into bed. The same bed I normally collapsed into after long days. She touched the blanket, then looked at me. I could see gratitude in her eyes. And something else. Fear. Whatever had happened before she arrived here hadn't been simple. I knew that much. I turned off the lamp. "You're safe." I wasn't sure she heard me, but I said it anyway. "Nobody's throwing you away again." For a long time I sat alone on the couch staring at the ceiling. Sleep never came. Questions kept circling through my mind. Why now? Why abandon her? Why leave her with me? And why did it feel like something much bigger was hiding beneath the surface? Around midnight I finally remembered the suitcases. I got up quietly and walked toward them. Maybe there would be medication inside. Important documents. Clues. Anything. I opened the first suitcase. Clothes, photographs, a few books. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed a worn leather folder tucked underneath everything else. I pulled it out. Old papers filled the inside. Property records, letters, bank documents, some dated decades earlier. I frowned. Why would my grandmother travel with these? I reached for another file. Before I could open it, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the apartment. Bang, bang, bang. The sound froze me. It was nearly 10 o'clock. Nobody visited at 10 o'clock. Especially not here. I looked toward the bedroom. Grandma was awake. Her eyes were fixed on the door. And for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw genuine fear on her face. Another knock. Harder this time. I stood. Every instinct from 20 years around military culture told me something was wrong. Very wrong. I crossed the room and opened the door. Standing there under the hallway light was Uncle Robert, and he looked furious. Part 2. The papers he wanted her to sign. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Robert stood in the doorway wearing an expensive winter coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. His silver SUV was visible through the parking lot lights behind him. Everything about him looked polished, successful, respectable. The kind of man strangers trusted immediately. The kind of man who knew exactly how to weaponize that trust. His eyes moved past me and landed on my grandmother. I saw the tension leave his shoulders. Not relief. Calculation. The same expression I'd seen on senior officers during difficult negotiations. He was evaluating the situation, looking for an advantage. "Sarah," he said finally. I didn't move. "What do you want?" His jaw tightened. "I came to check on Mom." I almost laughed. The audacity of it was unbelievable. "You left her outside my apartment." His face remained perfectly calm. "I knew you'd take care of her." I stared at him. There are moments when a lie is so ridiculous that arguing becomes pointless. This was one of them. Behind me, Grandma Evelyn remained seated on the edge of the bed, watching, listening, or at least appearing to listen. Robert stepped forward. I blocked the doorway. "Move." "No." His smile vanished. "Sarah, don't make this difficult." "Then tell me why you abandoned your mother." His eyes flickered away for half a second. "A mistake. People rarely look away when they're telling the truth." Things became complicated. Complicated. I hated that word. People used it whenever they wanted to avoid responsibility. Divorces were complicated. Business deals were complicated. Leaving an elderly woman on someone's doorstep was not complicated. It was cruel. "You're not coming in." For a second I thought he might push past me. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "I need her signature." There it was. The real reason he had come. Not concern. Not guilt. Paperwork. I folded my arms. "What kind of paperwork?" "It's family business." "Then explain it." His expression hardened. "It's private." I held out my hand. "Let me see it." "No." That answer told me everything I needed to know. People hiding nothing don't refuse basic questions, especially when legal documents are involved. I glanced back at my grandmother. She was staring at the envelope, and suddenly she looked terrified. Not confused, not lost. Terrified. Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. Robert noticed it too. His eyes narrowed. "Mom?" He stepped sideways, trying to see around me. "Just sign the papers and we can all move on." Grandma lowered her gaze immediately, like someone expecting punishment. Something about that crushed me. I had seen frightened young soldiers, abused spouses, victims of intimidation. The look was always the same, and now I was seeing it in my 82-year-old grandmother. "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. Robert turned back toward me. "No." "No, lawyer." I pointed toward the envelope. "No explanation." I stepped closer. And absolutely no signatures. For several seconds we stared at each other. Then something ugly flashed across his face. Gone almost immediately. But I saw it. Anger. Real anger. Not because he cared about my grandmother. Because I was interfering. "You think you're smarter than everyone else because you're in the army." I smiled slightly. "No." His nostrils flared. "I think people should understand documents before signing them." His hand tightened around the envelope. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A short, humorless laugh. "You've always been dramatic. Always." That word caught my attention. Robert barely spoke to me growing up. He certainly wasn't around enough to know what I'd always been. He was trying to establish authority. Trying to place me back into the role of child. It wasn't going to work. "I'm not signing anything." I pointed toward the parking lot. "Leave." His eyes narrowed. For a moment I thought he might refuse. Then he looked past me again, at my grandmother, and something silently passed between them. I couldn't identify it. Fear on one side, frustration on the other. But it wasn't normal. Not even close. Finally he turned around. "This isn't over." I watched him walk away. The SUV disappeared into the darkness minutes later. Only then did I close the door. The apartment felt strangely quiet. I turned toward my grandmother. She was trembling. Not violently. Just enough to notice. I sat beside her. "It's okay." She looked at me. Then toward the door. Then toward the envelope Robert had briefly displayed. Whatever those papers were, she understood them. That much was obvious. I squeezed her hand, and silently promised myself I would find out exactly what my uncle was trying to hide. The following week settled into a routine. A strange routine, but a good one. Every morning before reporting to base, I left breakfast ready. Every evening I came home as quickly as possible. We developed our own ways of communicating. Simple gestures, written notes, expressions, patience. A surprising amount of patience. I learned that my grandmother still loved crossword puzzles. She loved old Western movies. She hated overcooked vegetables. And despite her age, she possessed a wicked sense of humor. One afternoon, she watched me struggle with a stubborn jar lid, then calmly opened it herself. The look she gave me afterward nearly made me laugh. For the first time since she arrived, I saw genuine amusement in her eyes. Little by little, the apartment changed. It stopped feeling like my apartment. It became our home. And I realized something uncomfortable. I was happier. Lonelier people often don't realize how lonely they are until someone enters their life. That realization made what Robert had done seem even worse. How could anyone throw away someone like her? The answer came unexpectedly. 3 weeks after she moved in. I was leaving for work when Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring apartment called out, "Sarah." I stopped. She hesitated. "You know that older gentleman who's been visiting?" A cold sensation spread through my chest. "What gentleman?" "The one who comes when you're gone." My stomach dropped. "How often?" She frowned thoughtfully. "Several times. Several. Not once. Not twice. Several." I felt my pulse quicken. "What does he do?" "He knocks." She pointed toward my apartment. "Sometimes he stays 20 or 30 minutes. I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. Robert had been coming here while I was at work. Repeatedly. My grandmother had never mentioned it. Of course she couldn't exactly tell me. Or so I thought. That evening I searched the apartment carefully. Nothing seemed disturbed. Nothing missing. But my instincts wouldn't let it go. Something was wrong. Very wrong. A few days later, while organizing some belongings from the suitcases, I discovered an old photograph hidden inside a worn book. The picture was faded, yellowed with age. A younger version of Grandma Evelyn stood beside a man in military uniform. Both were smiling. Both looked happy. I turned the photograph over. A handwritten message covered the back. Just 4 words. "Never let Robert know." I stared at the sentence, then read it again. And again. The handwriting belonged to my grandfather. I recognized it from old birthday cards and letters. A chill moved down my spine. "Never let Robert know." Know what? The photograph suddenly felt heavier. Like a warning sent across decades. Outside, snow drifted quietly past the apartment windows. Inside, my grandmother sat in her chair watching me, her eyes fixed on the photograph. And for the first time, I had the unmistakable feeling that she knew exactly what was happening. But whatever secret she carried, it was far bigger than abandoned suitcases, and far more dangerous than I had imagined. Part 3: Grandma's Secret. The photograph stayed on my kitchen table for 3 days. Every time I walked past it, I found myself stopping, studying it, trying to see something I'd missed. The man in uniform was my grandfather, Thomas Mitchell, a decorated Army veteran, a quiet man who had died when I was 17. Growing up, I remembered him as steady, the kind of person who never raised his voice because he never needed to. People listened when he spoke, even Robert, especially Robert. Yet somehow my grandfather had written a warning that specifically mentioned his own son. "Never let Robert know." 4 words that refused to leave my mind. On the 4th day, I took a personal leave afternoon and drove across town to see someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Michael Hayes, my grandparents' longtime attorney. His office occupied the 2nd floor of an old brick building downtown. The waiting room looked exactly as I remembered. Dark wood furniture, family photographs, a grandfather clock ticking softly near the reception desk. Nothing modern, nothing flashy. Michael himself looked older than I remembered. More gray hair, more wrinkles, but his eyes remained sharp. The moment he saw the photograph, his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. A slight tightening around the eyes. The kind lawyers develop when they suddenly become very interested. "Where did you get this, one of Grandma's suitcases?" He studied the photograph for several seconds, then carefully placed it on his desk. "How is Evelyn?" I hesitated. "She's living with me." His eyebrows rose. "With you?" I nodded. "Robert dropped her off at my apartment." The silence that followed lasted long enough to become uncomfortable. Michael slowly removed his glasses. "That doesn't surprise me." The answer caught me off guard. "You expected something like this?" He leaned back, choosing his words carefully. Lawyers do that when they know more than they want to say. "Let's just say Robert has never been particularly patient where money is concerned." There it was again. Money. The same thing Robert had accidentally mentioned weeks earlier. The same thing hiding behind every strange detail. I leaned forward. What did my grandfather mean? Michael looked at the photograph, then at me, then toward the closed office door. For a moment he seemed to be debating something internally. Finally he sighed. "There were discussions years ago." "What kind of discussions?" "Estate matters." "Estate matters." Another lawyer phrase. Another half answer. I crossed my arms. "Michael." He smiled faintly. "You sound exactly like your grandfather when you're irritated." I wasn't in the mood for nostalgia. Apparently he realized that. His smile disappeared. "There was a trust." I froze. "A trust?" He nodded. "Your grandfather established several financial protections before he passed away. My pulse quickened. How much? I don't know the current value. That answer sounded genuine. What happened to it? Michael's expression darkened. That's the problem. I waited. The original documentation disappeared. My stomach tightened. Disappeared. He nodded. Only Evelyn knew where certain records were kept. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Suddenly dozens of scattered details began connecting. The abandoned grandmother. The mysterious paperwork. Robert's visits. The fear in Grandma's eyes. The warning on the photograph. It all pointed toward the same thing. Something valuable. Something Robert desperately wanted. What about Grandma's medical records? Michael frowned. What about them? They said she couldn't speak. His expression changed again, this time more noticeably. Who said that? My family. Michael leaned back slowly, then shook his head. I've never seen documentation confirming complete loss of speech. I stared at him. What? Evelyn's hearing deteriorated significantly. He nodded. That's true. But speaking, he shrugged. I was never informed she became entirely incapable of speech. A strange sensation ran through me, like standing on unstable ground. For years, everyone in the family had accepted that Grandma couldn't talk. Nobody questioned it. Nobody challenged it. Nobody investigated it, including me. The realization bothered me more than it should have. I left Michael's office with more questions than answers. The drive home felt longer than usual. Snow-covered mountains stretched across the horizon. Traffic crawled. My thoughts raced. By the time I reached the apartment, dusk had settled over the city. Grandma sat near the living room window knitting. The sight instantly calmed me. For a moment I simply watched her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with everything I'd learned. Finally I sat across from her. The photograph rested in my hands. She noticed immediately. Her eyes lingered on it, then drifted away. I took a breath. Grandma. She looked up. I spoke slowly, clearly, not because she was incapable, because I wanted her to understand every word. Can you really not speak? The question hung between us. For several seconds nothing happened. Her face remained unreadable. Then she lowered her eyes. No answer. No reaction. Nothing. I immediately felt guilty. Like I'd asked something unfair. Something invasive. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. It's okay. Maybe Michael was wrong. Maybe there were details nobody knew. Maybe I was chasing ghosts. That night I convinced myself to stop overthinking. The next morning I returned to work. The following 2 days passed normally. At least they appeared normal. Then everything changed. I finished a training briefing early on Friday. A last-minute cancellation freed my schedule. For once I was heading home before sunset. I remember feeling almost cheerful. That feeling lasted exactly 30 seconds. The moment I stepped into the apartment hallway I heard voices. My apartment door wasn't fully closed. It stood slightly open. My heartbeat accelerated. Instinct took over. Years of military training sharpened my focus instantly. I moved quietly, carefully, one step at a time. Then I heard Robert. Just sign it. The anger in his voice was unmistakable. I reached the doorway, looked inside, and froze. My grandmother sat at the kitchen table. A stack of documents lay in front of her. Robert stood beside her, holding a pen. His face was red, frustrated, desperate. Nobody needs to know. His voice dropped lower. You owe me this. I felt something snap inside me. Get away from her. Robert spun around. Shock flashed across his face. Then irritation. Then fury. What are you doing here? I walked directly between him and my grandmother. What are you doing here? The pen disappeared into his pocket. The documents followed. Too quickly. Far too quickly. Like someone caught stealing. Family business. The same answer. The same lie. I stepped closer. No. His jaw tightened. You don't understand. Then explain it. For several seconds he remained silent. Then the mask slipped. Not completely. Just enough. Enough for me to see what had been hiding underneath all along. Greed. Pure greed. That money belongs to my family. The words escaped before he could stop them. Money. Again. There it was. The truth finally exposing itself. His eyes widened slightly. He realized his mistake. I realized it too. Whatever he wanted my grandmother to sign, it involved money. A lot of money. And he was terrified of losing access to it. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Robert grabbed his coat. This isn't your fight. I looked directly into his eyes. It is now. For a moment I thought he might say more. Instead he left. The door slammed behind him. The apartment fell silent. I turned toward Grandma. She looked exhausted, drained, frightened. I knelt beside her chair. It's over. At least for today. She stared at me for several seconds, longer than usual. Then her gaze shifted toward the blue suitcase sitting near the bedroom wall. I followed her eyes, confused. When I looked back, she was still watching me. Something felt different, almost electric. Then it happened. The first sound, barely above a whisper. So quiet I thought I imagined it. I leaned closer, my heart pounding. And then I heard her again. A voice. Weak, rough, unused, but unmistakably real. The key. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. Tears instantly filled my eyes. Grandma swallowed, then forced out 3 more words. The blue suitcase. Part 4. The woman everyone underestimated. For several seconds I couldn't move. couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I just stared at my grandmother. The room seemed to shrink around us. The ticking kitchen clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside. Everything faded. There was only her, and the words she had just spoken. The blue suitcase. My grandmother's voice was weak, raspy, and fragile from years of disuse, yet those 4 words hit harder than anything I'd ever heard. Not because they were dramatic, because they were real. She had spoken. After all these years, after decades of everyone deciding what she could and couldn't do, after years of being treated like furniture, like an inconvenience, like someone already halfway gone, she had spoken. Tears blurred my vision. Grandma! Her eyes softened. Slowly, carefully, she reached for my hand. Then she squeezed it. The same way she had when I was a child. The same way she had after my grandfather's funeral. The same way she had when I left for military training. 1,000 unspoken conversations existed inside that single gesture. I swallowed hard, then looked toward the suitcase. The blue suitcase sat against the bedroom wall exactly where it had been since the day she arrived. Ordinary, worn, forgettable, and apparently important enough to frighten Robert. I stood and carried it to the kitchen table. Grandma watched silently. When I placed it in front of her, she nodded. Once, slowly. Permission. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Clothing, photographs, personal items. Then I noticed the false bottom. It was hidden well. A thin panel beneath folded sweaters. Someone who wasn't specifically looking for it would never have noticed. I carefully lifted it, and immediately understood why Robert had been desperate. A thick collection of folders filled the hidden compartment. Dozens of them. Some old, some newer. Everyone carefully organized. Everyone labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. I looked at her. She nodded again. Open them. So I did. The first folder contained bank statements. The second contained investment records. The third contained property documents. By the 4th folder, my pulse was racing. By the 5th, I knew exactly what I was looking at. Evidence. Years and years of evidence. Detailed. Meticulous. Devastating. I spent most of that night reviewing documents. Then the next day. Then most of Sunday. And the deeper I went, the worse it became. Robert hadn't simply taken advantage of his mother. He had systematically stolen from her. For years. Sometimes through questionable transfers. Sometimes through forged authorizations. Sometimes through shell companies connected to Jason. Each individual transaction looked innocent. Small enough not to attract attention. But together, the picture was horrifying. Millions of dollars. Not thousands. Millions. My stomach turned as I worked through the records. I kept waiting to discover a misunderstanding. A reasonable explanation. Something. Anything. But there wasn't one. The pattern remained consistent. Robert transferred money. Jason benefited. My grandmother lost assets. Again. And again. And again. Late Sunday afternoon, I found a sealed envelope. It contained several handwritten letters. The first one was addressed to me. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Sarah, if you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, Robert finally became desperate. Second, I was right about you. I stopped reading. Emotion tightened my throat. For a moment, I simply stared at the page. Then continued. You always reminded me of your grandfather. You listen before speaking. You pay attention when others do not. Most importantly, you stay when leaving would be easier. The words hit harder than expected. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. For years, I pretended to know less than I did. Sometimes people reveal their true character when they believe you are powerless. Robert revealed everything. The room felt very quiet. Painfully quiet. The letter continued for several more pages. And with every paragraph, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The truth was almost unbelievable. Years ago, after my grandfather died, my grandmother discovered irregularities in financial accounts. She confronted Robert. Instead of stopping, he became more careful, more patient, more sophisticated. Eventually, she realized something important. If Robert believed she was watching, he would hide. If he believed she was helpless, he would become careless. So she let him underestimate her. For years. I lowered the letter. My grandmother sat quietly across from me, watching, waiting. Not for sympathy, not for praise, just waiting for me to understand. And finally I did. She wasn't weak. She wasn't passive. She wasn't confused. She had been gathering evidence patiently, relentlessly, like a hunter setting a trap. The realization left me speechless. Most people would have fought openly. Most people would have demanded justice immediately. Grandma had chosen a different strategy. She had waited until Robert exposed everything. And now he had. Completely. The following morning I drove straight back to Michael Hayes. This time I brought 3 boxes. By the time I finished unloading them, his secretary looked concerned. Michael looked alarmed. What happened? I placed the first folder on his desk. Then the second. Then the third. His expression changed within minutes. The longer he reviewed the documents, the more serious he became. Finally, he removed his glasses, exhaled slowly, and looked directly at me. Good Lord. That wasn't the reaction I wanted. But it was probably the reaction I expected. How bad is it? Michael leaned back. For several seconds, he simply stared at the paperwork. Then he answered. Worse than I imagined. I sat quietly, waiting. He tapped several documents. These records establish a pattern. Another tap. These establish intent. Another. These establish fraud. I swallowed. How much? He calculated briefly. Then gave me a number. I felt physically ill. More than $3 million. $3 million. The figure seemed unreal. Almost impossible. Yet the document supported every dollar. Michael closed the final folder. Robert is in serious trouble. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something resembling hope. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. Hope. Because for once the truth wasn't hidden. It was documented. Recorded. Proven. And facts are stubborn things, especially in court. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Much faster. Within days, formal filings were underway. Emergency motions followed. Financial reviews began. Investigators became involved. And suddenly the people who had ignored my grandmother for years were paying very close attention. Robert called repeatedly. I never answered. Jason left messages. I deleted them. Aunt Linda sent 3 emails. Unread. For the first time they were frightened. Not because of me. Because of evidence. Evidence they couldn't explain away. Then 1 week later everything changed again. A courier arrived at Robert's home. He signed for the package personally. Inside was a court summons, along with formal notice of civil action. According to Michael, Robert initially laughed. Actually laughed. He assumed I was behind it. He assumed an angry niece had decided to cause trouble. Then he reached the final page and saw the name of the plaintiff. The laughter stopped. Because the lawsuit wasn't filed by Sarah Mitchell. It wasn't filed by Michael Hayes. It wasn't filed by any government agency. The person bringing the case was the one person Robert had spent years underestimating. The woman he believed couldn't hear him, couldn't understand him, couldn't fight back. Evelyn Mitchell, his mother. Part 5, Grandma finally spoke. The courtroom was quieter than any church I'd ever entered. Not because it was empty, because everyone was waiting. Waiting for something they couldn't quite define. The hearing had attracted more attention than anyone expected. Financial investigators filled several rows. Attorneys shuffled documents across polished tables. Reporters sat near the back after learning that millions of dollars and years of alleged fraud were involved. And at the center of it all sat my grandmother, Evelyn Mitchell, 82 years old, small, silver-haired, wearing a simple navy dress she had owned for years, looking at first glance like the least powerful person in the room. That illusion lasted exactly 30 minutes. I sat beside Michael Hayes at the plaintiff's table. Across the room, Robert stared straight ahead. His confidence looked forced now, fragile. The man who had swaggered through life believing he controlled every situation was beginning to understand something terrifying. Control is easy when nobody knows the truth. The moment the truth surfaces, everything changes. Jason sat behind him, pale, restless, constantly checking his phone. Neither of them looked anything like the people who had blocked my number after abandoning Grandma outside my apartment. Now they looked worried. Very worried. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The hearing began. For nearly an hour, attorneys reviewed financial records, transfers, property documents, and corporate filings. Robert's legal team tried to explain the transactions, tried to portray them as misunderstandings, family arrangements, accounting errors. But every explanation seemed weaker than the one before, because facts have weight, and the evidence Grandma had collected weighed a great deal. Still, Robert held on to one final hope. I could see it. He believed his mother would never testify, even if she appeared in court, even if she sat in the witness chair, even if she wanted justice. He believed she couldn't speak, the same mistake he had been making for years. Eventually, Michael stood. Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to testify. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Robert's attorney immediately objected. Michael calmly responded. The judge reviewed several documents, then nodded. Mrs. Mitchell may take the stand. I helped Grandma walk forward. The room watched. Every eye followed her. Every whisper stopped. I could feel Robert staring. Probably wondering why we were bothering. Probably expecting silence. Probably expecting weakness. Grandma settled into the witness chair. The judge smiled politely. Mrs. Mitchell, do you understand why you're here today? For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Grandma lifted her head and spoke. Yes, Your Honor. The effect was immediate. The courtroom froze. A reporter dropped a pen. Someone gasped. Jason's mouth literally fell open. But nobody looked more shocked than Robert. The color vanished from his face. His hands tightened around the edge of the table. He looked as though reality itself had betrayed him. For years he had built his entire plan around one assumption. And that assumption had just collapsed. Grandma continued. Her voice wasn't strong. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Truth rarely needs theatrics. I understand exactly why I'm here. Silence. Absolute silence. Then Michael began asking questions. Carefully. Methodically. Patiently. Grandma answered everyone. She explained how she discovered missing funds after my grandfather's death. She described confronting Robert. She explained why she began documenting transactions. Why she copied records. Why she preserved letters. Why she kept decades of evidence. Then came the question that changed everything. Mrs. Mitchell, Michael asked, why did you pretend not to understand what was happening? Grandma looked directly at Robert. Not with hatred. Not even with anger. Just sadness. Deep sadness. The kind only family can create. Because he was my son. The room remained silent. He already knew how to lie. Her voice trembled slightly. He already knew how to steal. She paused. But I wanted to know how far he would go. Robert lowered his eyes. For the first time, he couldn't look at her. Grandma continued. When people think you are powerless, they stop hiding who they really are. I felt chills run through me. Because she was right. Completely right. Robert hadn't exposed himself because someone caught him. He exposed himself because he believed nobody was watching. The testimony continued for nearly 2 hours. Every answer strengthened the case. Every document matched her account. Every timeline aligned. Eventually, even Robert's attorney looked defeated. The outcome was becoming unavoidable. Near the end of the hearing, the judge reviewed the evidence one final time. The courtroom waited. The silence felt endless. Then the judge spoke. His words landed like thunder. Asset freezes. Financial recovery proceedings. Expanded fraud investigations. Additional reviews involving associated companies. Several findings were referred for further legal action. Each announcement drained more color from Robert's face. Jason looked ready to collapse. The hearing ended shortly afterward. People began filing out. Reporters rushed toward the doors. Attorneys gathered paperwork. Conversations erupted throughout the room. Yet amid all the movement, I noticed something unexpected. Grandma remained seated, quietly, peacefully, as though a burden she'd carried for years had finally been lifted. I walked over. "You okay?" She smiled. A real smile. The kind I'd rarely seen since she moved in. Yes. One simple word. One beautiful word. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Questions flew in every direction. Neither of us stopped. Neither of us answered. We simply walked to the car together. The mountain air felt fresh, clean, like the beginning of something rather than the end. The months that followed brought consequences. Serious consequences. Robert lost control of several assets. Multiple accounts were frozen. Properties were sold. Investigations expanded. Jason's business became part of the review process. Eventually, both men faced realities they had spent years avoiding. Actions have consequences, especially when those actions are documented. Meanwhile, life became quieter, better. Grandma moved into a small house not far from my apartment. Not a mansion. Not some fantasy estate. Just a comfortable home with a garden she loved. She spent mornings reading on the porch, afternoons tending flowers, evenings watching old westerns. The peace suited her. One afternoon, several months later, we sat together beneath a maple tree in her backyard. The sun was beginning to set. The sky glowed orange and gold across the Colorado horizon. For a while, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Then I asked the question that had been living in my head for months. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Grandma smiled. A small smile. Thoughtful. Patient. The kind grandparents save for important moments. Then she looked toward the garden. I was waiting. For what? She turned toward me. Her eyes shimmered slightly. To see who stayed. The answer hit harder than anything I'd heard during the trial. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was true. People often claim they love you. But real love reveals itself when helping becomes inconvenient. When sacrifice becomes necessary. When there is nothing to gain. Everyone in our family had made a choice. Robert chose money. Jason chose comfort. Others chose silence, and somehow, despite having the smallest apartment and the fewest resources, I had chosen to stay. Grandma squeezed my hand. Now I know. I couldn't speak for a moment. The sunset painted everything gold around us. The garden, the porch, the woman who had survived betrayal without becoming bitter. Eventually I smiled, and squeezed her hand back. Because after everything that had happened, one truth remained. Family isn't defined by who shares your blood. Family is defined by who stands beside you when everyone else walks away. And sometimes the quietest person in the room ends up speaking the loudest truth of all. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever discovered who truly cared about you during a difficult time? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. We share stories like this every day, stories about family resilience, courage, and justice. So if you'd like more journeys like this one, be sure to subscribe and join us. Until next time, take care of the people who stay. Because they're the ones who matter most.